Dan, welcome to Talk Python to me. Great to have you here.
Hello, hello. I'm excited to be here. I'm a big fan of Talk Python. I'm a big fan of you, and I'm a big fan of Python. So there we go.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, and thank you. Yes, and on Python's behalf as well, thanks. No, it's great to be here. I've been on your show, Work Item, which was really fun. Thank you for having me. And now it's time to dive into your expertise. I'm going to talk agentic stuff, and especially we're going to talk Model Context Protocol, MCP. I think this is one of the really important layers that is kind of invisible, right? A lot of the coding agents and coding AI and chat LLMs and all that, that's what people think when they hear all these things, but like there's got to be plumbing, right? We're going to talk plumbing.
Yeah.
Nothing is more amazing than plumbing. Like we all get excited about plumbing. So no,
I know
technology plumbing is cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things too, that look at how fast it grew. Think about it. Like last year at this time, like at the time when we were recording the Work Item episode, MCP did not exist.
Yeah.
It's not a thing.
Wild.
And now everybody's talking about MCP. Like you talk to any big companies, you talk to like the banks, the healthcare, the gaming, like everybody cares about MCP. That's great.
It's very great. We're going to dive into it. Before we do, let's dive into you. Give us a quick background on yourself.
Absolutely. So I am Delimarsky. I am a principal product engineer at Microsoft. I work in the core AI division. So we're focusing on, as the name suggests, AI stuff, but applied to developers. So I'm very, very heavily in the developer ecosystem. And I'm one of the core maintainers of the Model Context Protocol. So I say one of because there's many of us. It's not just me. There's many wonderful, talented people way smarter than me. And yeah, that's a short intro.
Okay, so when we talk about MCP, you're one of the people helping build it. That's incredible.
That is correct. Yeah, I try to contribute as much as I can.
Well, before we move on, just how'd you get into that position?
Oh, it all started with one of the things that was actually near and dear to my heart, which is security and authorization. So when MCP first came out, it had a auth spec. So we see on the screen right now, Michael is showing the kind of the Model Context Protocol specification page. But when MCP first started, it had essentially a spec that outlines how to do authorization for MCP servers. And that spec was a good start, but it made a lot of assumptions about the infrastructure and the tooling and how developers build MCP servers that were, I want to say, a little flawed at scale. So my thought was like, I'll just get some smart people with me and we'll help rewrite this. And we asked the MCP folks at Anthropic and they said yes. And so we did. And I basically like incorporated all the feedback and iterated on it. And then again, it's a massive community effort. We pushed it out and got it merged in the June version of the protocol. And then the folks at Anthropic just reached out and said, like, hey, do you want to help shape the protocol? And here I am. Helping shape the protocol.
You seem to know what you're talking about, and you sure are participating a lot. Why don't you just hang around?
Yeah, basically.
Okay, that's great. And you work at Microsoft. What do you do there?
That is correct. At Microsoft, I work on developer tools. So think like if you ever use Copilot, if you ever use any... Oh, by the way, GitHub Spec Kit, for folks that have not heard about it, we released it like last month, but that's something that I help drive now, help maintain. It's how do you do spec-driven development with agentic tools, agentic coding tools. Yeah, that's what I do.
Okay, cool. So something that I've started to do a lot when I'm involving AI, I go in like spurts. I'll work for a long time, just sort of writing regular, and then I'm like, this is really a lot of drudgery, not critical or central to what I'm doing. Let me just uncork some agentic AI on it and let it go. But one of the things I've started doing a lot, and it has to do with the spec thing that you've touched on here, is I'll pick a really high level model, like a complex smart model, and I'll say, I want to plan this out. I've given you some ideas. I want you to look at the code and let's create a detailed plan of what you're going to do. And I'll have it write a markdown file. And even have a lot of my projects, I have just a plans folder, and it's just full of all these different projects. Maybe they're sort of equivalent to a PR in the end.
Yeah.
And I'll plan that out really well. Then I'll switch it down to a lower model, to a new context, and say, let's just do phase 1. Let's do phase 2 and knock it out. That sounds like Michael just made up some stuff equivalent of the spec-based programming. Is that right? Like, how does that compare to what you're talking about here?
It's close. It's very close. And this is where when people talk about spec-driven development, I want to emphasize the fact that there's no one correct approach. Like people think that it's like, oh, I'm just going to wait for whatever company's going to come out and come up with the right thing. Like it all depends on your experience. It depends on your models. The SpecKit project that we launched is our hypothesis, our experiment, how we believe it works. And what it does is basically what you described. You start with a spec, you start outlining what and why I am building. Then you focus on the technical implementation plan, which is like, okay, now what technology stack I'm using here. And then you break that down into tasks, which are basically just consumable chunks that the AI can go and either iteratively or in parallel execute and build the stuff that you want to build. So all of it, again, is still an experiment. So I'm not by any stretch claiming that what we have is the end of it all or the right way to do this. There's many, many ways to do this.
Okay. And you even over on DevBlogs wrote diving into spec-driven development with GitHub SpecKit.
That is correct. There's also a GitHub blog that I highly recommend folks check out. It's actually on the github.blog, so you can go there and look for, there you go. It's called Spec-driven Development with AI. Get started with a new open source toolkit. And we do have an open source toolkit.
All right. So how is this different than just what I've done? I know I've seen
structure.
This before. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It just, all it does is think of it as this is the recipe book, right? Like if you decided to like, oh, I want to cook up a new application. And you're like, well, what's the recipe? Like this bundles the recipe for it. It says, and by the way, here's the box set of ingredients that you can just use to build this. That's what this is. That's SpecKit.
Okay. Well, very exciting. Let's maybe start to get into the main topic, though. MCP servers. I've heard this put out as sort of an analogy to the LSP, which I know is I first heard of it in VS Code. I don't know if it came from VS Code. Maybe it did, but it's the thing that allows so many different editors to plug into tooling like Pylance or Firefly or TY or a bunch of cool things are coming out around here, different implementations of LSPs. And I've heard that MCPs are kind of like that for AI. Maybe contrast those a bit for people.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the MCP specification, if you look through the website and just peruse through the documentation, you might have like faint echoes of LSP design decisions, faint echoes of kind of the LSP architecture. But yes, it basically, think of it this way. The way the folks at Anthropic have been describing it, it is USB-C for AI. And when I say that is the problem with a lot of the LLMs, a lot of the modern models is the fact that it takes some amount of time to train them, which means that inherently they get locked into a specific training date, if you will. So the corpus of knowledge that it gets embedded in them gets locked at a certain date. And when you talk to a lot of enterprise customers, you talk to a lot of customers in the wild, it doesn't need to be enterprise, by the way. It could be startups, it could be hobbies, developers. They're like, well, I want to use AI with this fresh data that I have. Maybe I have, I don't know, a Dropbox account, and I want to use AI to sort my files. Or maybe I want to use some data inside Salesforce to go and help me analyze my sales and find out outliers and maybe customers I want to focus on. And
I just interviewed the people from Nice GUI, and they build robots that cruise around in architectural areas. Like maybe I want some way to excuse me, to like ask AI, hey, look at how the robots are doing now, and then, or see if they're busy, find a free one, right? That might be a thing, huh?
Yeah, no, for sure. Exactly. It's like any kind of live data or managed data, something that is more dynamic than the corpus of knowledge that is embedded in these models by default. And for those, if I would ask you like, okay, well, let's imagine a world where MCP does not exist. How would you go about plugging this data in, like into your LLM, right? And like, there's different ways to do this. Like people have done like the RAGs. People have done, dump like CSV files and then be like, oh, analyze the CSV file and all these like hacky solutions. But it feels like it's not universal. It doesn't really work for all cases. And something that you've done in one LLM doesn't work in another, and now you're locked into this environment. So it becomes very hard to manage. So MCP is essentially the answer to that. MCP says, look, we don't care what data you're connecting to, what applications, what actions. We provide you a universal interface by which every single LLM, every single client that understands MCP can invoke those primitives, get that data, and embed the data in the context that you're operating in. And that's another thing, important thing. People think of MCP as the data connector, but it's not only a data connector. I want to call it like a primitive connector, because you can use MCP with a lot of wonderful things that folks have probably seen already. Like my favorite example here is Blender MCP. Like for folks that don't know, Blender is a 3D modeling tool. And there's an MCP server by which you can actually guide an LLM saying like, I am building this like medieval scene with a dragon and the lighting and stuff. And it goes and it builds it for you, right? Through this MCP. And MCP is the connective layer between Blender, which has its own native API. And then there's the MCP server that the LLM knows how to talk to, right? Because the LLM wouldn't know how to like, okay, how do you talk to Blender? How do you go and set up the plugin and whatever the WebSockets, whatever they might be using, right? Like it's super complex, so it needs expertise. But an MCP server is essentially saying, I have these set of primitives that the LLM can invoke at any time, like create polygon or create scene or create sphere, and then based on that information, go and iterate on it. So MCP is that adapter. Yeah,
I see. So the LLM or agentic AI or whatever that you're working with, it says, all right, I'm going to talk to Blender. Blender says I have these core ideas, these core building blocks. It sort of turns it more into Lego instead of just, I'm going to have a saw or whatever, and I can cut how it's
exactly.
Like, okay, I have spheres, I have cylinders, I have squares, I have shading.
Yeah.
They've asked me to do this. What can I build composing that sort of?
Exactly. Precisely.
Okay.
Right. So it's you're operating on a set of primitives, right? And this is where you don't even need to expose the entirety of the surface of Blender APIs. You can just say like, oh, I want to have like, there's the 10 primitives that I think are the most valuable. I'm going to go ahead and use those. And out of those, you compose things.
And maybe there's an advantage to that too, right? Maybe you're like, I want to use Blender to create 2D scenes. So I'm only going to expose stuff or rotations or whatever that preserves some sort of 2D view of the thing. Like we're doing CAD where it's top down from the side. Like those are the ways you got to look at it. You can't arbitrarily rotate it.
Yeah. So essentially like the MCP servers in this case act as a universal translation layer between whatever's downstream of the MCP server, which can be an application, an API, a database, like anything, and the client, which knows like, I know how to talk to MCP and nothing else. I have no idea what's behind. I don't know what the REST API you have. What's the authentication authorization logic? Just give an MCP server.
Okay. It sounds a little bit like an API. And by API, I mean the most general sense of the word, not, oh, it's a REST API and it makes sure it uses the verbs this way. I mean, like anything that you could sort of call and either get data or cause an action. That could be a REST API, but it could just be, an OS level API or something like that, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's all it is just a connective layer. So yeah, and people often ask like, well, couldn't you do this with like REST APIs? Couldn't you do this with a GraphQL APIs instead, right? Because like it's been invented. Why are we creating new things? But the thing about this is, even if you look in the world of REST APIs, like think about it, the last time you worked with a REST API from some vendor and then switched another REST API from someone, how much of that knowledge was like one-to-one reused? Or the infrastructure that you built, or authentication logic. You have these like 17 different dances by which you get the token, right? And MCP essentially is the opinionated version of saying, no, this is how you do auth. This is how you do message passing between entities. This is how you expose primitives. It's a highly opinionated stack.
Yeah, and so then once implemented, we call them the hosts, like VS Code or PyCharm or Cursor or whatever, Claude Code, it knows, all right, here's how I inspect the capabilities of this thing. Here's how I stream back the responses if it's going to take it 10 minutes to do what I asked it. This is how you do it with streaming HTTP APIs and so on.
Precisely, right? Because you only need to then implement once. And especially if you use one of the existing MCP SDKs that we're going to be talking down the line, like that's the core value prop. It's like you do it once and it just works. You don't need to worry about like, oh, but this other MCP server decided to implement their auth in a completely different way. What do I do now?
Yeah. Now, if I want to build one of these things, does it have to be implemented in an LLM, or could I build just a traditional fast API that ultimately does queries against a database with no prompt?
Yeah. No, I mean, like MCP servers themselves are just essentially entities that they're capable of exchanging JSON RPC messages. Like you can write a client that is completely detached from an LLM and just invokes tools.
Right. Okay.
Right. Like,
awesome.
You can if you want to. I don't know why you would do that, but you absolutely can.
I'm sure people have a reason. So I see a comment out in the audience from Frankie about RAG, and also you mentioned RAG at the beginning and say, well, maybe RAG is not working for you. Let's just sort of contrast that a bit, right? Like maybe not everyone knows what RAG is. Retrieval augmented generation. What is this?
Yeah, essentially, if you have a way for you to optimize basically the context for the LLM, I'll put it this way, like in very layman terms, it's like I have a code base. I have a code base that has a number of entities like classes and functions and everything. And in a RAG, you're essentially building a vector database that says like, okay, here's the list of things that exist. And then the LLM, you can go and query this thing and find out what exists in this code base. So if you make decisions about like, I want to build a authorization component, how do I do this? It's like, okay, well, it can build out that context for itself. This is kind of the very basic idea behind the RAG.
Got it. So instead of trying to put all the information just into a prompt, it has to read every time. You can kind of additionally train it on these things and then keep the content, the question shorter because it knows the details.
Right. You essentially have a knowledge base that's outside of the primary training set. Like that's the core value prop of this is you're augmenting the LLM with additional knowledge that you have in the context that you're operating in.
Okay. So something I've wanted to build for a while, and I do intend to, but we'll see if I ever get there, is something where people could go and have like an AI conversation with this episode, for example, right? With something on the podcast. I've got 10 years of transcripts.
Yeah.
At like over 1 million words, I'm pretty sure. That doesn't fit in most contexts, and even if it does, it's problematic.
Yeah.
So it'd be great to do some sort of RAG thing for Talk Python. Maybe there's an MCP angle that's really interesting. Like,
yeah.
What could I do with MCPs in the podcast, do you think?
MCPs in a podcast. So one of them, of course, is like querying the data, which is I want to make sure that, find me all the episodes where I ever talked with Michael about AI, right? Like,
sure.
It could be one thing. I actually think that because of the richness of the MCP capabilities, to me, when it comes to like podcasts, I envision a world where I can use MCPs to edit podcasts. That's my dream of this. And actually, like this is something that I've been experimenting with because I haven't fully wrapped around kind of like how exactly that would look like. But one of the things that I do, like as I'm sure you do when you edit a podcast, you have to go through it, generate the transcript, clean up things, then make sure that you add timestamps, select the most interesting parts about the podcast. So can I potentially go to an LLM and say, okay, here's where my MP3 file is. Can you go and generate transcript, clean it up, and then find me the most interesting parts about this, and then produce me a report that I can then use to maybe like a HTML-based web app, and I can just like a one-click say like publish, right? And to me, like the value of maybe the MCP connector here is that maybe I can plug it in behind the scenes with like FFmpeg to go and convert the MP3 into a WAV file, and then use Whisper to go and generate the transcript, and then go and extract things for it, right? And for a lot of these pieces of the tasks that I need to do, you would imagine that you would have a different tool inside my MCP server, which is tool is one of the primitives that basically a LLM invokes. And it says, oh, let me generate the transcript. And there's a tool that's called generate transcript, and it's going to use that to produce a transcript. And it's like, okay, there's another tool that says, find
so you could give
parts.
Yes, you could just give the LLM an episode number, 200 or something.
Yeah.
And it could go to your podcast MCP server and say transcript for 200, even if it doesn't exist, it'll figure it out and generate it, that kind of stuff.
Yes. And also the wonderful thing about LLMs and MCP servers is that you're not actually using just one MCP server, right? So I might have an MCP server for myself that is basically like I said, the one that generates transcripts, creates a landing page in my podcast website, and then based on that content, there's also next steps. Now I have an MP3. I want to upload that MP3 to Cloudflare, where I host my podcast. So there may be a Cloudflare MCP server that the LM is going to invoke and say, I need to now upload this. And then it's going to invoke the other MCP server, right? So you have this basically stack of MCP servers that you can start using one with another. And that's where the superpower comes from. Like, you're not just using one application and saying like, okay, hold on, let me finish a task for podcast production. Then I'll do other things. Like, it can chain things together and then say, oh, and by the way, there's an MCP server maybe for audio conversion that produces like 10 variations of the format. Let me invoke that. And then you're going through this process.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really big, hints at one of the really big differences between just using a chat LLM versus some of the agent tool using types of things, right? The ability to say, now I have to accomplish this task, and I figured out there is some way I'm capable of accomplishing that, right? Either that's to list a directory, to look for a file, or to communicate with the Cloudflare MCP that we talked about, and so on.
Its power is composability. I'll put it this way. It's the fact that you can compose things together and have them work together based on the prompts that you have and scenarios that you have.
Okay, cool. So imagining the Cloudflare MCP thing exists, your podcast's preparation MCP thing exists. How does my AI know? Let's keep it real basic. Let's say I'm using Claude Code, but we could plug this into others. But just even something just terminal based, no UI or whatever. Is it going to discover them just out of the blue? Probably not all of them. You got to point it at them and.
Yeah.
How does it know which ones it's allowed to use in this context? Right? Like, how do I get it so I can actually use one of these? And we'll talk about maybe building them.
Yeah. So for MCP servers themselves, you add them explicitly to your host or your client, whatever that might be. VS Code, Claude Desktop, doesn't matter. So you explicitly say, I want to use my podcast MCP. I want to be using my Cloudflare MCP server. I want to use my Descript MCP servers to remove the ums and uhs from the podcast, right? So you would essentially go through some means in that client, on your client of choice, to go and add those MCP servers. Now, the question is, how do you discover those MCP servers? So there's various places where you can go to. We just launched the MCP registry that is nothing short other than an API that indexes all of the available MCP servers that are out there. Right. So we're looking right now at a blog post on the MCP blog. It's called Introducing the MCP Registry, that got published September 8th of this year. So not that long ago, but basically
22 days or something like that. And when you say you're talking the official Model Context Protocol.io working group.
Yes. The Model Context Protocol folks. And there's a bunch of them that were specifically focused on the registry, right? And you see them in the authors like David Sarayapara, Adam Jones, Taras, Toby, and Theo. But they essentially were in charge of kind of building this out. And the registry is a centralized API, essentially, that aggregates an index of MCP servers that are out there. So you can use the registry inside your client, whatever client you might be using, to find MCP servers for what you want. Maybe there's a Playwright MCP server, maybe there's a Perplexity MCP server, right? So it's all coming from the registry.
Okay. Sounds a little bit like Docker Hub.
Kind of. Yes, and just like Docker Hub, you actually don't need Docker Hub to install an MCP server, or in this case, like a Docker container, right? Like, you can just go to random GitHub repos and find somebody that built an MCP server for what you're trying to do, and you can just plug it in.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's how I use Docker Hub, by not using Docker Hub for all the
stuff
exactly. I build. But I get
know
the foundations. Exactly. I'm like, but I'm going to build it here. It also has the concept of public and private registries.
Yes. Yeah, so public registry is essentially something that, like, GitHub, by the way, maintains their own registry, right? So it's public, and you can just go and discover MCP servers through the GitHub registry or the public registry. Also, we know that MCP servers are used within different companies. You might have, let's say, some data that you're locking in behind 7 gates that only certain people can access. You can build internal MCP servers. And for those things, you ship internal private registries where you can say, no, I want my folks in my company to only access these servers and nothing else. Right.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Is there a place that I can go to the Model Context Protocol registry, the MCP registry, and like browse it like you can Docker Hub?
Yeah. Yeah. So right now you can't browse it through a UI, but you can look at other registries that can consume some of the content from here. So like I believe GitHub registry is one of the consumers. So you can look at, I think it's github.com/MCP. There
Yes.
we go. Yeah.
Okay.
And you can see some of the registries, and you can see like if you click on one of the install buttons, it's gonna like allow you to take it directly into like VS Code and then just bring it in and install it in the context of your editor.
Okay. Yeah. Very nice. So some of these are like web crawling,
Yeah.
Notion. Okay. I know Notion just added a big agentic AI thing, and I've seen a lot of pushback. There's probably a lot of happy users who just use it, but
Yeah.
people are like, why is this in my way? I just want to work with this. But, if you were, it'd be really cool to, maybe plug that in instead of going, we're going to try to use the API to download this embedded database with the information.
Exactly.
And then, like, you just talk to it, right?
Exactly. That's again what I like about MCP is that if I want to connect to Notion to get my notebook and some notes from my stand-up meetings, I don't need to worry about how they structure their API and how to use auth or something. Just install the Notion MCP and then ask the LLMs like pull the latest notes and summarize them for me, and then it's gonna know.
Is there a LinkedIn one? Their API is so bad.
Oh,
Oh, it makes me sad.
that's Peter. For any LinkedIn people watching this, we need to have a LinkedIn MCP server.
Yes, I think so. It might save me. Okay. Very interesting here. Yeah, I think people should come here and just kind of poke around. You can see there's a lot of interesting things that I think might spark some ideas
Yeah.
as you start to play with it, like Postman. So I guess one of the things you're going to want to deal with is like a lot of these I see here, Launch Darkly, Postman, Atlassian, Notion, and so on. You got to pass things like, I am this person. Therefore, I want to see my information, not other people's or only public. I got to see private info, but mine. There's a whole security side, and I think that's kind of how you got pulled into it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So for these things, yeah.
We just put like an API key in GitHub and you just check that in, then just use that when you're trying to.
Don't do that. Don't put API keys in GitHub and check them in. What can be done? So starting with the latest spec of MCP that again shipped in June, there is a formal way for services to do authorization. So it's based on OAuth 2.1. I know that there's people listening that's like, oh no, did he just say OAuth? I have to learn OAuth now. You don't. Again, there's a lot of libraries that do this. If you're an MCP server developer, it's solved for you. If you're an MCP server consumer, you don't even need to think about it. So when you connect an MCP server, as a consumer, you'll essentially have the ability to log in with your credentials. So if an MCP server, for example, for like we saw Chroma or like MongoDB that's on the screen here. If I use the MongoDB server and I want to connect to a database, usually they provide you a way to either one, you go into your MCP server config and you say, I will give you an API key if your server is using an API key. Or if it's using OAuth, then you can just essentially snap to using OAuth, the standard flow. Your client is going to bootstrap the authentication flow. You're going to go to the box, enter your credentials, log in. The client is going to store the tokens, and then you access the server with your credentials as you, getting access to your data, not something else.
One thing that looks really interesting, and there's an example of it right here with the Nux. Never written a Nux app in my life, but here I have one that helps you understand your Vite Nux app. One of the things that I think could be really interesting, and probably MCPs could play a really important role, is we have these huge foundation models, OpenAI and Claude Opus and so on, that are generally knowledgeable about the whole world and are big, expensive to train. But I can see a future where we get good enough to have a bunch of small models. Like this is the Vue.js model.
Yeah.
If you need to know Vue.js, it's as good as anything, but it runs on your computer in a gig of RAM because it's just trained so specifically
Yeah.
on Vue. And I feel like maybe you could MCP your way together. Like, well, I'm using this tech stack, so we're going to click together a bunch of things that don't provide data, but provide information about what your, architecture or something like that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can go both ways, right? Like there's a specialized model, and there's an argument for saying that the more general scenarios would always work best. Like I think there's always two camps of those folks that I talk to. I personally think that for certain things, there's a tremendous amount of value for hyper centralized or hyper local models. I'll give you an example, right? Like I want to organize the photos on my machine. Like maybe I have a lot of duplicates that, because when you take photos with your modern cell phones, like just click, 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 and then you have like 10 images of your dog, and you're like, they're kind of the same, but I want to pick the best one. Like from a privacy standpoint, like I don't want to send that off to some server remotely somewhere with my photos, which, there's like family photos, there's all sorts of like stuff that I do not want to send off to some remote server. For those things, I want to use a local model, and maybe there's an MCP server that allows me to basically like, I can find the photos and then crop them and like add some metadata or remove metadata or whatever I want to do, right? So for those things, I absolutely see the value in these like local models where I can just say, I want it to be very good at this one specific task and that task only. And I will never use this photo model for web app creation, but photos is going to be darn good. And I think there's a lot of value for that. And if you augment it with MCP, I think it's superpowers right there.
Yeah, it does seem like it could be. It could be this little step would benefit from a local model, but I don't want to constrain the entire problem solving to a local model.
Right.
Right. I think that's kind of the problem. Like I use LM Studio a lot, and I've got, for example, I have the OpenAI 20 billion parameter open weights model that I actually program against, and it does all sorts of cool stuff for me. But I don't use it for my general work because it's either too slow because it's on my Mac Mini, or I just want something that is better, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're going to just start I'm using this model to solve this problem, like that might not be the final outcome where we end up, right?
Yeah, for sure. And especially because for a lot of the generalized models, you're like, no matter how you look at this, you're not going to have the computer resources anywhere near what like OpenAI Anthropic has, right? So like in terms of speed and quality, what you're going to get, you might get some like fine-tuned examples where some scenarios work very, very well. But I think ultimately, if we look at the general use case, these generalizable models are going to be ahead.
Yeah, I definitely agree as well. But I hadn't really considered how MCPs might allow you to use the really high-end models to compose specialized, not quite as generally smart, but specialized versions of different things. It could be.
Yeah, MCP can do anything. MCP again is just it's a pipe. What you do with that pipe is up to you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about how one might build such pipes with Python. So there's actually a model context protocol GitHub organization. And within there, they have the Python SDK, the official Python SDK for the MCP servers and clients. So that's also interesting, the clients bit. So maybe we could kind of like, there's a lot of concepts and things here, and I don't want to dive too much into code, but maybe we could work our way through some of the concepts and some of the steps of building such a thing.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, it all starts from just getting the SDK, right? And this is for like anybody that's using Python. You can just get it through pip or UV. I'm a big fan of the folks at Astral. I think they're doing a fantastic job with UV and UVX. Like I use it for GitHub Spec Kit. So, UV add MCP, MCP CLI, and there you go. You can be on your way. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Okay. That'll do it. And then, you can specify like the CLI options or whatever kind you want.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, it's using Fast MCP. Are you familiar with Fast MCP?
No, I know some projects with Fast in it, but not MCP.
Yeah. So Fast MCP is basically, think of it like Fast API for MCP. It's essentially like allowing you to compose MCP servers faster because it has a lot of the primitives baked in. So things like authorization, which can be like kind of a pain point, but if you use Fast MCP, it makes it a little easier. And fast MCP is a integral part of the Python SDK story for the actual official Python SDK.
Right. The programming model looks like it would feel quite familiar to anyone who knows the Flask API or beyond. I think it's just, a little sidebar. I think it's really interesting how Flask is quite popular, but it's also spawned almost every single web app after it has kind of borrowed its programming model. So even if you're not exactly using Flask, if you're using Lightstar or Fast API or whatever, you're still kind of doing that kind of programming, and it's the same here, right?
Yeah.
You create an MCP as the app. You say at mcp.tool or at mcp.prompt, and you put these onto functions, and they now become webized. Yeah.
Isn't that okay? I am not I write Python, but I'm not a Python expert. I'm sorry, Brett Cannon, if you're watching this. But
we'll take that part out. Don't worry. You don't want to separate.
As the stream's live, that's okay. So do you call it in Python? Do you call them decorators or is it attributes? In C# it's attributes.
Yeah, in C# it's attributes. You do it with square brackets. In Python, it's decorators, and you do it with the @ symbol.
Okay, so the decorators themselves. And look at the simplicity of this. Look at the screen right now of a sample where we're looking at the actual Python SDK repo. And one of the samples, you literally have a Python function. You have def add, and there's your arguments. You would pass to a function 2 integers. And then all you need to do to make that a tool that an LM can invoke is just add that at mcp.tool decorator. That's it. You're not going and crafting elaborate JSON RPC envelopes and converters and all these things. All that stuff is done for you. Add a decorator, boom, you have a tool. That's it.
Yeah. It's
simple.
It's really, really simple to program. And there's actually some fairly complicated data exchange stuff going on, streaming partial results as they come in, because we're all used to two things. AI requests taking a real long time. But B, that you see the little dots thinking, and periodically some stuff that's coming by to oh yeah, okay, I see where it's going. I don't know what it's going to come up with, but at least we could see it's working, right? So to sort of keep that flow going, you've got the streaming style, right?
Exactly. And all of this is again, I'm looking at the sample and the way I would describe it is a delightful developer experience. If I'm a developer, I focus on writing the core functions. I don't have to worry about how do I make this into a tool? Put a decorator on. That's how you make it a tool.
Yeah, excellent. So I have this server, and you mentioned that it's fast API or Flask. How do I host it? Once I call run or whatever I do on it.
Yeah.
Then what? I know I probably don't put it straight on the internet. Maybe I do. I don't know.
So there's two types of servers that you can have. You can have local MCP servers, and local MCP servers are essentially just a local application. Think of it running like a console app or your regular Python script. And what it does, they might be referred to, you might hear they're called STDIO for standard input output. And it's using basically native OS constructs to talk between processes, right? The MCP client and the server. So it's still JSON RPC, but JSON RPC over STDIO pipes. So the other one is Streamable HTTP. And Streamable HTTP, it's MCP server that can be hosted somewhere in the cloud. It can be hosted on your own home lab server if you want to, and you give it an IP address. You can be hosted in AWS or Azure or GCP. It doesn't really matter. So for those servers, the JSON RPC messages are basically done through the HTTP pipe with some set of HTTP conventions. That's kind of where it is. There's no constraint as to where you have to host it. It's whoever supports running Python can host your MCP server.
Right. Okay. So I could put it behind Nginx or Caddy or
absolutely
whatever.
Toss it into a container and put it somewhere. It's totally fine.
Okay. You talked about all these sort of different, private but online, but not quite online. With home lab and stuff. I just want to give a shout out to Tailscale. Have you Tailscaled lately? Oh, it is so good.
It is wonderful. I love Tailscale. It's my go-to thing, and I'll tell you this: do you remember the days when you had to work? This episode is not sponsored by Tailscale, for the record. Not that I know.
Should be. They can reach out.
Yeah. Hey, Tailscale. Yeah. Yeah, Michael Talks is awesome. You should sponsor it. But anyway, so Tailscale is great. Like, remember in the olden days when you had to like set up an open VPN and be like, let me generate the keys, let me email myself the key so I can open it on the iPhone and then add the key and then go through this process. And it's just like, oh man, such a pain, such a pain. And Tailscale, just like flip the switch and you're in.
Yeah.
Magic.
Or dying DNS, where you.
Oh yeah, because you have to bind your IP address to their domain, and then you have to run this agent to constantly update it. Oh yes,
yeah. The agent goes down, your IP changes. Well, then there's also all the NAT firewall and your local machine on your local network change. You're like, no, it doesn't work. Oh, it's my machine on my. We had a power outage, so when the router rebooted, I got a new IP.
Yes.
It was so bad. And so why is this sidebar worth going into here, folks? Because this is what's called an overlay network.
Yes.
And so you can put it up on your iPhone, you can put it on your laptop, you can put it on your desktop. You can even put it on your Linux server if you want. And it basically exposes all of those things over a network that's like a VPN, but the rest of your behavior is just not VPN, it's just normal, but it just brings those in just the most incredible way. So for example, I have a high-end Mac Mini here that I use for the streaming that I'm talking to you on now. It has tons of RAM and has a Pro chip and stuff. So I just have my one LLM and my database servers running there. And it's when I'm doing dev work, instead of every, my laptop, my other machine, always running in replica, it all just goes here to this. And even if I'm in a coffee shop or I'm out for work, right? As long as Tailscale's running, I do a database query or an LLM call through an API, and it just hits this thing.
Yep.
Just as if I was here, and it's glorious. And all that's for free, right? There's paid versions, but you can do a lot.
Yeah, you can do a lot for free in their free tier. It's amazing, and like it's all WireGuard, like it's all using kind of the most modern secure standards. I'll say, like to me, like if you want to access things like, oh, your security cameras at home, and you do not trust cloud providers to have access to your security home cameras, put them in your local network and use Tailscale, and then you can go somewhere, flip the switch on your phone, boom. You can see your cameras from remote without exposing them to the broader internet. It's amazing.
Right. You don't open up any ports on your router, nothing like that. So why am I going on such an excited diversion? One, it's just so awesome, and I just recently discovered it this year, so it's a thing. But it's relevant. If you've got an MCP server and you want to keep it local, even local from your server back to like your company or something potentially, you could hide all that stuff behind Tailscale. It's like transparently available, but also there's no ports, there's no open internet. The easiest way to secure stuff is to just not let the internet have at it,
Yep, no, exactly. This is what I've been actually doing with one of my friends who was setting up a home lab, and they were experimenting with some of the MCP servers for like, I believe it was like setting up for like a Minecraft server, and we just tossed them on the same server, and because it's Tailscale, and then I connect them to the clients with a IP that Tailscale gives me, it just magically works. And I didn't need to expose this to the internet. I didn't need to pay for any cloud providers in somebody's home lab. It's just there.
Yeah, and you don't need to use SSH across it. Like you could it's just there. It's all super, super good. Okay, back to what I was
back to MCP
back to MCP. But I was asking, how do you run it? And you're like, we could run it on our home lab or on a Raspberry Pi or something, right? This Tailscale thing is a way to sort of really nicely make that available to you. Make that available to your AI agents or whatever without going, well, now how do I host it on like a server for real? Yeah. Okay, so let's see. That is the registry. There we go. So I want to talk about a couple things. We talked about tools.
Yeah.
And we talked about there's prompts, there's resources. Let's maybe go through each one real quick. These are all just decorators you put on functions, but they're slightly different.
Yeah.
What is the purpose of a tool, and why would I do that?
Yeah, a tool basically is a function call, right? It's like your tool equals function. That's the way I describe it. Like that's basically like, hey, I want the LLM to go do something. What does it need to do? And this is where like get weather, give me the sum. It needs to go and do this. This is what a tool is. It's a primitive that does something.
Insert record into database or whatever. This looks like you could probably find and replace fast MCP with fast API and tool with get.
Yeah.
And and you or a post or something, and you might be able to pretty much that is kind of the closest match, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. That's basically it. It's I want to invoke some kind of action. Go do that action for me.
Right. And at least in the examples, there's no AI in the action. It's just
No.
Just an
The
AI
AI
capability.
knows
Okay.
that it needs to invoke the action. Like if I go to an LLM and say, send an email to Michael that says the podcast was awesome. And then it's going to go in and say, oh, let me go find the tool that is capable of sending emails. Oh, there's a tool from like MailChimp. Okay, let me go do that. There's a tool in the MailChimp MCP server that says send email. That sounds great. I'm going to use that to send the email, right? And that tool itself doesn't use AI behind the scenes. It's just going to do SMTP send email. That's all it does.
Yeah, awesome. It also has other examples of sort of data exchange along the way, I guess.
Absolutely.
And you can pass in this context, and then the context can start pushing updates and information back
Yes.
to the user, right?
And report progress back. So for example, if your email takes like 7 hops, it's like, okay, let me first connect to this SMTP server. Let me then verify the credentials. Blah, blah, blah. Like you can encode that basically if you implement the, you might not, but you can implement progress reporting so that the client knows like, oh, you're like 30% through your task, or you're like 40% through your task now, because it reports on the progress of what you're doing.
Yeah, super cool. You can also do structured output, which is pretty interesting. And there's many ways in which it can be done, but the number one way, as in if it was a ordered list, the first thing would be Pydantic models, right? Carrying on the fast API analogy here, right?
Yep. For a lot of these things, again, it's very like if you're a Python developer, a lot of these constructs are going to be very much familiar to you.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges people have often is like structured data versus, well, I got an LLM answer and it's a little different every time. And they upgrade the model from 5.1 to 5.15, and now it does something totally different. Like it can't, like how do I code against this, right? And so using structured data can be a big bonus, right?
Yeah.
Okay, super cool. Let's see prompts. Now it's starting to sound AI-like.
Yeah. So this is basically like the description says, prompts are reusable templates that help LLMs interact with your server effectively. If you have a server that does, I don't know, cooking recipes, it might provide prompts for like, what is what are the steps for a recipe and with substitutions where needed. So it allows you to basically pre-cook prompts that your server might be using.
Okay. And they might be passing these internally to...
Yes. Yeah. So
or they return to the host AI. You know, there's a lot of AIs involved here.
Right. You're essentially like you're exposing prompt templates. Like that's what it is. Like and saying like, oh, if you're a user, if you're looking for like creating a recipe, this is a template for that prompt for a recipe. Okay,
cool. There's also a little bit of a UI component, which is interesting. You can have a iconography representation of your actions.
Yeah, this is relatively new, but basically for some of them, like bake in some of the icons to just make it easier to differentiate between different actions. Because especially, again, like different servers can have different tools and there are many tools, and how do you like just parse the strings? Like just look at iconography.
Yeah. Another thing that it has built-in support for is working with images. So that's pretty wild.
Yeah, I've noticed that for a lot of the stuff, it's also like it's baked into these are not necessarily like MCP spec constructs. This is more like how the Python SDK exposes them and allows you to operate on them, right? Because like the fundamental constructs, the primitives are, we have tools, we have prompts, there is resources, which is another one. And the resources allows the LM to basically think of it as how do you refer to databases or files or entities within an API. Those are. There's also elicitations, as what Michael's showing right now on the screen. So we have elicitations is a way for an MCP server to go to the client and say, I want the client to provide me structured input on a specific question. Like, hey, can you give us your date of birth? And I expect a date. Can you give me a date back exactly so I don't need to guess from the LLM context, right? Or it can say like, you know, what kind of pet do you have? And it can give you a list of options that you can actually have to pick from. It's like, oh, dog, pet, reptile, like dog, cat, reptile, whatever. It allows you have that structured, controlled input, that it's not just you're typing into the chat box, but you're selecting from a list that the server asks you to. So that's another neat thing that recently got added.
Yeah, that looks quite interesting. And it has to do with a little bit with the WebSocket type of exchange as
kind
well,
of,
right?
yeah.
Like, not exactly, but it's going along. You've asked it something while it's working on that. It's come back and it's asking you to give it more information to carry on.
Yes, exactly.
In that sense, right?
Yep.
So could this be? I've worked on your requests. I've used the database MCP or whatever, and I've learned that there's 20 records. Do you want to delete them like you asked, or do you not want to delete them?
Yes, exactly that. Or it can say, hey, I found like 10 conflicting records. Which ones do I need to delete? And then you can help it basically do, right? So it asks for structured input so that you don't have to have it guess from whatever you type in the chat. Because if you type in the chat, it's non-deterministic, right? It could say, oh, delete all the records with the name John Doe. And then it's like, oh, I'll delete everything with Doe, because somehow that's what it decides. Like, oh, no.
Jane, come back.
Yeah. So it adds a little bit more structure.
Yeah, got it. And the programming model is super smooth here. They did a great job. So, for example, you might be doing this elicitation within a tool call, and that's an async function, async web function. And the way you do it is you just await context.elicit some message and schema, and then when the person responds, the async thing resumes and off you go, right? There's not some nested callbacks and all that kind of business.
That's nice. A very smooth developer experience. I love it.
Yeah, it definitely is. Okay. I do want to talk about some of the popular ones out there through a awesome list, because I'm just a sucker for awesome lists. But is there anything else that you feel like we should be covering here on the SDK?
Yeah, there's a lot of great work done with the Python SDK and the fast MCP folks. I would say, like, go through the repo. It's github.com/model.context protocol/python-sdk. Go there. There's some great samples to get you started. And again, we're always open to feedback. So if something's like, oh, this was too confusing, I didn't understand, the team is very receptive to feedback. So please let them know.
Yeah. 143 contributors. Last release 5 days ago. Bunch of PRs, right? It looks like it's pretty open. 600 closed PRs, pretty open to people working with it. Also, it looks kind of very beginner friendly in the sense that the issues are tagged with lots of stuff that you could search for, like needs motivation. You could go through and come up with some examples and help, even if you're not an expert in the SDK, for example.
Absolutely. And there's also, I believe the Python might be using the good first issue too. So if you're a new contributor, you've never looked at it, it's like don't be intimidated. There's plenty of good first issue. Like, there's plenty of things that you can just drop in and see, like, oh, I can help with that.
Yeah. Love it. Okay. You too can be an AI developer. I love it. Now let's talk about awesome MCP servers.
Awesome MCP servers.
This comes to us from the very well-known Punk Pie.
The person behind Galama.ai.
Yeah. Awesome. And 72,000 GitHub stars is no joke. So there may be a fad, but maybe people will stick around. I don't know. So this actually has support for a lot of different languages, and it's got scopes like, is this cloud or local or embedded and so on. But then you scroll down.
Look at the list. It's massive.
The list is, look at the scroll bar.
It is massive. Yeah, we're keep scrolling and scrolling.
God, I don't know. If I page down full speed and just page down the pinch down button, it's something along the lines of like 5 seconds just to get through the list. And these are one per line. So, it starts out, as one should when they're building awesome lists, with like categories, right? Command line, cloud platforms, biology, medicine, and bioinformatics.
There's one for everything.
I know. You want to just jump around a bit and we can just see what's here and we can
Yeah.
maybe riff on it?
Gaming. MCP
Gaming.
server
Let's
for
start
Unity 3D game engine integration for game development. That's kind of cool. Godot, Unity MCP,
Yeah.
MCP chess. An MCP server playing chess against LLMs. Did you ever think of like, can I beat an LLM at chess? And you want to like just get an MCP server to do that? There is one for that.
I'm starting to feel like it's better to do the local models for the chess playing against me one. I don't want the really smart ones. There's also Chess MCP, this is interesting. It's not the same as the other one. This is access your chess.com player data and records and other public info.
Yep.
Right. That's kind of cool. So if you wanted to say, hey, I'm building something and I would like access to sort of the Kaggle of chess players type of thing, right? Like the list of competitive chess results.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I personally have built one for Halo. I'm a big fan of Halo, the video game.
Are you? Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not on the list, which now I need to go and contribute to that list.
Let's do a PR.
Like that's the thing that I have is basically analyze my Halo stats. And I'll tell you what, the LLMs are getting really good at analyzing the stats. You give them the data, they can make some conclusions.
Yeah, I bet. Let's just keep it really crazy. Let's do, I was going to do delivery. We'll do that in a moment. Marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things I'm after just a very quick first impression, like you're running ads on someone's platform or you're doing marketing on someone's platform, but you want visibility into how that's going. So we've got the Facebook ads and PC server. We've got the Google ads MCP server and Amazon ads and so on, right? But what else that sounds about like most of it there, I suppose.
Yeah. But think of it this way. Like if you connect several of these MCP servers to your client, and then you connect them to all your ads accounts and then say, how are my ads performing and which ones of them are the best this past week? Right? Like I don't need to click around dashboards and figure out like the filters and everything. Just ask the LLM, pull the data, make a conclusion. Now, you still need to verify the conclusion to make sure it's not hallucinating things, but nonetheless, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. So one thing I realize now that we skipped over with the Python SDK is we talked all about the server. What about client things? Like if I wanted to create an MCP server that's effectively the composition of some other MCP servers, could I do that?
You absolutely can. Nothing stops you. Like an MCP server can also act as an MCP client and then connect to other MCP servers. Like there's no restriction to that, right? Like
nice.
It's basically, it's very composable, and a client for all intents and purposes is basically an entity that can connect to an MCP server, which can also be an MCP server. It's kind of circular.
Yeah. Yeah. It's turtles all the way down, but MCP
Absolutely.
this time. Yeah, it's AI turtles this time. So delivery, we just have the DoorDash delivery MCP server.
Oh man, like
hey, Claude, why is my food not here? Have you ever seen those fail videos or whatever? I watch weird YouTube stuff with my daughter sometimes, and you'll see like cops delivering DoorDash. We'll say, sorry, we had to arrest your DoorDash delivery, but we were pretty close, so we thought we'd just go ahead and deliver your food anyway. I mean, I don't know what the server's going to say, but it could say anything, you know?
The police are on their way.
Yeah, people are generally really appreciative. Like, well, thanks for getting me my dinner anyway. Let's see what else is out here. Got text to speech, which is interesting. Sports. Oh yeah.
Oh, so look at the Strava. Like if you're running or biking, you can use this also to analyze your data. There's a lot of MCP servers for data analysis, which is kind of cool.
Okay, this is the one that appeals to me. So multi-viewer, this is actually not a thing that I would want, but I think it's interesting. So multi-viewer is a motorsports desktop client. And what I think it does for IndyCar, WEC, Formula One, and even like the feeder classes. I think what it lets you do is put up both an overlay of telemetry onto watching the live stream, but also put the multiple people up in live streams at the same time or something like that, right?
That's kind of cool.
That's cool. So the reason I don't really like that is I don't watch any of those sports live. I record them, and so I can then pause it and then skip the commercials. And so this is like for a live stream sort of deal. But the MCP server, it controls multi-viewer for that. So maybe you could set up an AI that is watching what's going on and switches the views around in the multi-viewer for you using, and that's wild.
Or swaps to the most interesting telemetry at the specific moment.
Yeah, listen to the radio. They start getting all frantic. Like, all right, we're switching to that view.
Yeah, there's an NC server for everything. Like this list is massive. I'm actually like, every time I discover these things, like we're looking at this right now, I was like, oh, I didn't know there was one for multi-viewer. Like I didn't know what multi-viewer is until we talked right now.
Yeah, but boy, wouldn't that be a cool demo?
Yeah.
You know, at a conference, you're like, I know you've all seen the tic-tac-toe one, but let me show you the final of F1.
Yeah.
Or something, right?
Very astute observation, because again, like there's a lot of these like hello world kind of things. Like, oh, look, it's kind of neat. It responded with a thing. Like, give me the real thing. This is that real thing.
Yeah, that's super neat. All right, I guess we got the support one, that Atlassian, Jira, quick chat. Like, it's whatever you want, right?
That's the one to reduce your boring work. The Jira MCP server. Like you don't want to triage your bugs. Just let the LLM do it for you. Hey, can you go and find the things that are most important for me to work on today? Give me the bug numbers.
Yeah, or if you see somebody assign a bug to me, close it.
Yeah,
you know, I mean,
exactly. Just query all the bugs assigned to me, reassign them to somebody else.
Yeah, crazy, exactly. Not a good fit for this person.
Yeah, no, exactly. These are the life hacks you learn only from this podcast.
That's right. It's like if it involves MCP servers and cool stuff I can code, give it to me. Otherwise,
send it somewhere else.
Send it somewhere else. All right, Dan. I think we're getting pretty close on time here in terms of we got time to cover, but this is super fun. Maybe close things out for folks. Like they want to get started with MCP servers, either building them, consuming them, building and consuming them, plugging them into their tool chain. What do you tell them?
Yeah. So for folks that want to build, modelcontextprotocol.io, as simple as it gets, go there. It has guides, tutorials, SDK starters, everything is there. If you are a consumer of the MCPs and you want to like, hey, I want to do this like awesome thing with MC servers. First of all, the GitHub MCP registry that we showed earlier is one of those things, is github.com/MCP. Go explore. And then, of course, on GitHub, there's plenty of servers that are tagged with MCP. You can also take a look there. And there's other registries that also index MCP servers of all sorts, like Glama AI from PunkPy that we talked about before is one such registry that you can also look at and see if there's anything that's of interest. I will say that as you are exploring MCP servers, exercise caution, just like you would exercise with any other software and APIs and websites where you log in, because the responsibility is kind of on you to figure out like what's safe, what's not. If you have an MCP server that's like, oh, it's gonna read all my iMessages and sort them by importance, I'm like, yes, and do you know who built that and where your messages are going? So
are they also scanning for credit card numbers and
exactly
logins?
like
why not?
You messaged somebody with your social security number the other day. Nice. So be careful with those, but I'd say like explore them, and then we are working on formalizing discovery a bit better. So your clients like VS Code and Cursor and Claude Desktop are going to become better and better with more discoverability affordances.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I learned a ton. I'm sure the listeners did as well, and it was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. See you later.